Well, Grant, thank you so much for helping with my project. I was wondering if you could start off by talking a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my background is I'm someone who's always been, like, as long as I remember, interested and enthusiastic about space, like aerospace in general. So like aviation and space exploration, travel, science, all that kind of stuff. And uh, I kind of decided from an early age I wanted to pursue that as a career. And uh, the career path of engineering was appealing to me. Like I had kind of the natural skills for that, and I'm not really one of those kids who always dreamed about being an astronaut so much. Actually, I was really interested in what the astronauts did, but it was more that what was more interesting to me was the idea of like making vehicles that could carry people to other planets or out into space and make space travel more routine and more common. So I went down that route. I came of age during the time when Spaceship One was winning the X Prize and when SpaceX was just getting started. So, like, the commercial space industry was really seeming to take off in the 2000s when there had been a lot of these false starts before in the 80s and 90s. So I kind of went down that path, and uh, I started my career actually working at Boeing, kind of doing different things, but learning a lot about structural analysis and how to run tests for uh, I worked in the structures test lab there, so I was getting like some real hands-on engineering experience and carry that over to later places I worked. So I worked mainly on the launch side, so at places like Virgin Orbit, ABL, and now I'm at Blue Origin. So that's I all that to say, like, this is something that's been a passion of mine. It's been something that's been central to what I've wanted to do in my life, even though like I'm not directly connected to NASA or with the Artemis program. Like it's something I'm very interested in, and I'm following and hoping that like what I'm doing more on the launch side can somehow contribute to this happening, both through Artemis and through whatever programs come after of establishing more of a human presence deeper in space. So.
So you mentioned you've always had a passion about space exploration and building rockets and modes of transportation, I guess there. Um, was there ever a moment where you had some doubts? Like, am I going the right direction with this? Is it possible for me to actually pursue these dreams? Or have you always sort of had the confidence and encouragement to continue on?
Uh, I don't recall really having a lot of a crisis of confidence in it. I guess I just kind of always felt like this is something that people can do, so I'm just going to try to do it. And if it doesn't work out, there's other stuff I guess I can do. But like so far, it's I've been able to keep pursuing this dream, and it's not that it's an easy thing to do. Going through 4 years of getting an engineering education is a tough thing to do. I started a PhD program after that, and I spent about a year sort of spinning my wheels, not really connecting or meshing with any of the research going on, and that led to me leaving and taking another job. So like going off to Boeing instead of finishing that, which is kind of, such as I have regrets in my career. That's one of them, is that I spent a year pursuing this advanced degree that it's now looking unlikely that I'll ever finish. But at the same time, I've been able to do the kind of work I'm interested in doing. Like I'm there in the guts, helping to make rockets happen, helping decide like what valve goes where, how all the tubes mesh together to feed propellant to the engines and stuff like that. Because that's kind of what I'm doing. Is I'm on the fluids team at Blue Origin, so I'm working on the New Glenn rocket, making sure all the fluid systems dealing with propellant and pressurization do what they're supposed to do on New Glenn.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
I mean it sounds like really difficult work, especially considering the rocket under operates under the thrust going in different directions, and you have like free fall and
Mhm.
a whole bunch of other things going on. But a lot of people I think in like elementary and maybe even middle school have dreams about becoming astronaut or exploring space or
Mhm.
living on the moon. And then something happens between middle school and college where they don't go that direction. And
Mhm.
I was just wondering, if you think that's just like a natural thing, or uh, is there some way to kind of get more of them to into aerospace so that we really can go further and deeper?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's wired differently. So some people, some people, what might be something they're really interested and enthusiastic, even passionate about as a kid, is not necessarily the direction that's best for them as they come of age and as they grow up. For me, either it just was something that was such a deep passion for me. I felt like I had to keep pursuing it, or I lacked the imagination to come up with something else to do. You could interpret it either way. Uh, I think it helped that when I was that age where I was like, figuring out, okay, what am I actually going to do after high school? What am I going to study in college? Like, it looked like there was a bright future for this industry, and I think if anything, it looks even more like that now because at the time I was applying to colleges, like SpaceX still had not put anything in orbit yet. Like they tried to launch a Falcon 1 and failed 2 times, and they would fail again before they succeeded. But like I guess looking at what they had done so far and looking at what Scaled Composites had done with Spaceship One and what Richard Branson was doing with Virgin Galactic, it seemed like okay, there is something here, there is a future here, and like if I'd been born 10 years earlier, and so let's say I'm graduating high school in 1997 instead of 2007, uh, I don't know how I would have felt about things really because like that was that long period where the space shuttle had been around for you know over a decade at that point. It was going to keep flying for over a decade. NASA had plans of like, oh, we should develop next gen reusable vehicles, or we should send people back to the moon, but it was all pretty vague. And I I think it's good now that we have with Artemis this clear path of like, okay, this is what we want to do next beyond low Earth orbit. I am concerned a little bit that it seems kind of fragile of like, okay, we're going to try to send people back to the moon by 2024. What then? Like how many SLSs per year are we making? Not very many. So I think it would be more robust if it was part of a bigger thing, and that like showing people that there is a future here, that there is like going to be an industry there waiting for you when you're done would help a lot. I think such as anything else helped. Like I mean, there was the support I got from my family and my friends, and like I had the confidence that I could do whatever it was I wanted to do, and then knowing that there was going to be a bright future to look into in it, like those are the two things that helped me the most. If I had to say.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you bring all that up. Of course, it's funny. I graduated from high school about exactly the time frame you're talking about, '94,
Okay.
and so I kind of had that entire thing. I got to tell you, the internet is what
Mhm.
drew all the talent probably away from other endeavors, which was kind of a fascinating ride. In 1990, you probably would have an easier time explaining fluid dynamics to somebody than you would email or web shopping.
Mhm.
But by 2000, everybody knew about email and web shopping, and um, the idea of having conversations like this was
Mhm.
a little less granular and a little bit more less quality, and a little um, slower. But you could imagine having this conversation back in 2000. Yeah, you really couldn't imagine it in 1990. Um, I personally feel like that when it comes to aerospace, it seems like between what Blue Origin's doing and SpaceX is doing and Artemis and Rocket Labs and the commercial lunar payload services providers and what China's doing and even like India and Russia and the European Space Agency. I mean, it feels like we might be in the middle of a big transformation in aerospace too, where in 2030 things are going to be common that you really can't explain to people now. And you talked about the false starts earlier, and I
Mhm.
remember those false starts. And I go to space conferences where we have people who've been through false starts before that,
Mhm.
and they're very guardedly optimistic, or maybe even a little bit negative. Like I
Mhm.
think at some point you go through enough false starts that you just really can imagine breaking out, maybe. But
Yeah.
I feel like the 2020s are going to be different. And
Mhm.
do you feel the same? And if so, how do we convince everybody?
Well, just the last 10 years have been totally different from any time before then. In commercial space, especially, NASA's had, I think, a tougher time holding the public imagination during that, like on the human side, at least, just because the shuttle ended, and the shuttle and building the International Space Station was such a cornerstone. It was so central to what NASA human spaceflight was that there really just wasn't the resources there to develop what came next at the same time. It had to be this kind of parallel development. So that means that you got this period from 2011 when the shuttle ended to just earlier this year when Dragon started flying, where uh, from the outside, if you didn't know all the nuts and bolts of what was happening inside at NASA, it'd be easy to say, like, what the heck, is NASA canceled? Like, I remember that being a meme in like around 2011. It's like, oh, I thought NASA was canceled. They're not. It's like, no, like SLS is happening, Orion is happening, Commercial Crew is happening, but come back in another 5 years, 6 years. And the way aerospace schedules are, it always winds up happening later than you think it will. So while that was going on, while we were dependent on Soyuz and Russia and our partners in the International Space Station to keep people flying there, there was all this good work happening. It just hasn't become as apparent until now. And I think that will change a lot this next decade, like you're talking about. Of okay, all these things we've been working on for the last 10 years will become much more clear. And Crew Dragon and Starliner, when Orion starts flying people into space, uh, the fruits of all of that work that was happening kind of behind the scenes will come into the public consciousness much more. I think at the same time, like, look at where, yeah, I think there's maybe too much of a focus on SpaceX. So I hate to feed into that, because they are not the only thing happening by any means in commercial spaceflight. And anyone who knows about what's happening in space knows that. It's just like, if you're at the fringes, like, you're kind of interested, but not really part of that world. SpaceX is all you hear about and all you see most of the time. But they're the easiest thing to point at and say, okay, in 2010, they were just barely getting to where they could fly Falcon 9 into space. There was no reusability. Like, reusability was a thing they wanted to do, but they had no idea how to do. Flying people on Dragon was something they wanted to do, but they had no idea how to do that. Like, those were all way out there. And they were flying like once or twice a year. And now you look at it and they're flying over 20 times a year. Reusability is something we're almost taking for granted at this point, of like, yeah, of course, like, you can fly a first stage 5 times or more. Nobody doubts that, when like 10 years ago it was like, yeah, sure, you could do that, but that's kind of science fiction. Like, didn't the space shuttle show that maybe reusability isn't that good? It's like, no, the space shuttle showed one way not to do reusability and expect to save money, but it doesn't mean the concept was bad. So like, they've been making all this progress, and at the same time, you've got, like, Rocket Lab is now, they're another private company, using mostly their own resources and their investment resources, not some huge government, uh, some huge, uh, government defined program. They've just gone off and to their investors said, hey, we think we have a good idea to send stuff into space, and they did it. Like, that's a big deal, right? Like, Electron is a small rocket, Rocket Lab's a small company, but like, they can show that even a company with that resources can start putting things into space. And so I think we're going to see a lot more stories like that in the 2020s. Virgin Orbit's really close to putting things in orbit. I'm hoping they'll do that by the end of this year, but we'll see. If not this year, it'll come pretty soon, I think. And there's a bunch of other competitors in the small rocket world that are doing that. And I think, with SpaceX flying people on Dragon, hopefully we'll see more of that coming soon. We'll see people flying on Starliner. We'll see, Blue Origin. We definitely want to fly people eventually. Don't quote me on when that's going to happen, but we're all working toward that goal. So it's yeah, I think the last decade, in spite of the roadblocks we've hit, and in spite of the distraction of all this development happening without a lot of fireworks at NASA, it's been a very good decade. The last 10 years making progress on this front, and I think the next decade is going to be even more of that. Like, I don't see any forces that'll throw this into reverse, that'll just suddenly start making a bunch of these companies fail. Like, many of them will fail, but many of them will succeed. The reason there's going to be lots of companies failing is because there's dozens of companies trying now. It's not just a handful. It's not like, okay, Rotary Rocket tried this and it didn't work. Kistler tried this and it didn't work. Like, I would much, much rather be where we are now than be back in that time, like in the wilderness, trying to figure it all out.
I almost think it's amazing having all these small players that give a really good shot. Some of them succeed, some of them fail. Because even like the failures, now you have people
Mhm.
with experience and training, and obviously some willpower and tenacity and
Mhm.
vision and what have you. So um,
Yeah, there's
I
all these alumni out in the industry now that have been through the process, both through the successes and through the failures, who can give their expertise to this stuff. Whereas before, you had to draw from other industries, or you had to like NASA or other government space agencies were basically the only place you could go for that expertise.
Exactly, and that actually helps to address a believability issue. I think, I mean, I personally think there's like trillions of dollars in the global economy that's looking for something interesting to do,
Hmm.
and space hasn't been really an outlet for that because you know you don't have successful investors in space or small firms being successful. But once you start seeing that, then
Hmm.
I think you'll see more of that money flow into that, which creates more and more opportunity, and more
Hmm.
it becomes self-fulfilling. And Rocket Labs is a great example. I mean, New Zealand, who would have thought New
Hmm.
Zealand would be like the other country that would have a private company that would be able to make things into orbit? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, no, it'll be really interesting when the histories of this stuff is written. And you're talking about the attempts and the failures of the 90s. It would be really interesting whoever writes the first like really good history of SpaceX and of places like Rocket Lab. Okay, like what happened that was different? And partly I think it's that the technology it has always been advancing. It's a single engineer can be a lot more productive now than they could have been 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, just because like we were talking about with the internet, with all of these, with that, and with the software tools that we've had, they've become so much more effective. But it's more than just that. And part of me wonders, like, okay, luck is part of it. Like SpaceX did have a good roll of the dice with their fourth launch, and if their fourth launch had been unsuccessful, they would be something like rotary rocket or like Kistler, that like only a few enthusiasts would know who Elon Musk is. But but it's not just that. It's a combination of like the tools got better, we got the serendipity of the right people getting lucky enough times, but also like I think they were the first to hit on this, and then Rocket Lab were able to do this too, where they they just made the right decisions at the right time to like make sure they were not going off spending all these resources developing stuff that wasn't what was like the core essential thing to get the rocket flying. But they got the money and they put it in the resources, and they put it exactly where they needed to be successful. And so that's one of the things I look forward to with a little more historic perspective on this, is like, okay, what are the lessons that everybody else can learn from that?
yeah, it's interesting to think about. And I mean, to do anything in space now is like prohibitively expensive. Like if you wanted to create solar panels, big arrays of solar panels and beam down the energy to Earth, getting that into orbit is like almost impossible. And
Mhm.
to do the mining on the moon is, I mean, you would have to go and do your prospecting and your own mining and your own like refining and manufacturing, all this stuff. And
Mhm.
Jeff Bezos, the founder of Blue Origin, where you work, likes to talk about how, if he had to start, create online payments, how to deliver stuff to people's homes, and, create an online store, if he
Mhm.
had to create all the infrastructure for that, Amazon would have never been created, right? I mean,
Right.
but because the credit card system is in there, because you had UPS and other package delivery firms, and
Mhm.
because you had the internet, um, you know, he was able to create a company that brought those three things together that became really, really successful. And he talks about applying that same strategy to space exploration, that
Mhm.
he really wants to create that foundation. And right before this call, I was talking to my wife um, about this interview, and you know, uh, it, she was kind of pointing out, you don't really hear that much about Blue Origin,
Mhm.
because, but I feel like Jeff is really going for inevitability as opposed to speed. And I was wondering if you thought that was a fair comparison.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the the motto of Blue Origin gets blue we talk about it every once in a while. It's discussed a lot internally, maybe externally it's less discussed, but the motto of the company is Gradatum Ferociter, which means step by step ferociously. And the whole ethos of that is that uh it's not about making progress in these discrete bits where you're just making a big public relations some kind of big PR moment and trying to shoot ahead of everybody else all at once. But that real real progress and sustainable progress is all about having this roadmap, figuring out like what is every little individual step, and then that you need to get from where you are now to where you want to be, and keep making progress toward them. And that is at its core what Blue Origin is trying to do. Every company has its ups and downs, and maybe sometimes we aspire to that more than that's what we're actually doing. But I think that uh, your wife's comment about not hearing as much about Blue Origin, that's part of it. Is that there's a sense of, I think, Jeff, from the top, like at the founder level, we don't want to go talk about all these big plans about what we're going to do. Like we do that every once in a while. There was the talk that Jeff Bezos did about a year and a half ago, where Blue Moon was unveiled, where there was this big vision of people living in habitats in space. And it's like there is that vision there. We want to get there, but right now, just talking about that, where we'll be in decades from now, isn't going to get us there. What will get us there is making step by step that steady progress toward those goals. And then after we've done something, like you saw this, that Blue Origin was very, very secretive. Almost nobody outside the company knew what they were doing until they'd had their first suborbital flight successful, and then that was the announcement of it. It's not, hey, we're going to go do this, but we did it. By the way, we launched a rocket into space and recovered it. So I think as the company's evolved, and as we have more outside customers now, we've got a few different groups that are signed up to fly on New Glenn. We're selling engines to ULA to be the first stage engines for Vulcan. We have to be a little more open about what we're doing, and we there's a little bit less of that, of like surprising everyone after we've done something. You have to be a little more clear about what your progress is in those interim steps. But that idea is still there, and that's in the culture. It's different from a place like SpaceX, where they went through this period where they were very cash starved and where they needed to raise money desperately to stay afloat. So they needed a little bit of the pizzazz to do that. Uh, and I think that's still reflected in their culture, like them being open about what they were trying to do and really trying to sell very slickly everything that they were planning on doing. That was part of what kept them going. So I think I wouldn't say one of them is inherently better than the other. It's just a reflection of how the two companies got to where they are. So their Blue Origin is going to do big things. We're planning on doing big stuff. It's just we're, I guess, less flashy about it than the places like SpaceX, where you've got Elon Musk telling everyone, oh yeah, we've got Starship. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be flying 100 people to Mars in 4 years or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm fully confident Starship will fly at some point and it will do amazing things. It'll be an incredible vehicle. I also do not believe his schedules at all because that's, if you spent some time in this industry watching it, you know how it is. You lived through, oh yeah, Falcon Heavy is going to fly next year for like 6 years in a row, and it's fine. It's a little disappointing when you miss your deadlines, but they flew it. Falcon Heavy is flying, Dragon is flying, Starship will fly someday, and it's cool that they're as open with it as they are. Like Blue Origin, we have this test site out in the desert in West Texas that nobody can see, so it's very much just what's happening inside the company. We know, and when there's something that we think is worth sharing with the outside world, then we do that. SpaceX has their site for Starship right next to where some other people live in Boca Chica, so they can. It's not that SpaceX necessarily wants to be that open about it, but they've located their operations where they're that easy to watch, that like you've got people all over the world watching these webcams, seeing what they're doing every time they blow up one of those or every time they do a little hop test. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad that there's at least these two companies. If it was just one, I would be concerned about the future of the industry. But SpaceX is doing a lot of great stuff. Blue Origin, we're I don't think it's any secret we're not as far along as they are. We're not flying stuff in orbit yet, but we'll get there, and there will others that will follow after us. Can you still hear me? Okay. By the way, I got an
I
okay.
can
Good. I
hear
got a
you.
message that my audio quality was maybe bad, but okay. Good.
It was just a blip, but it
Okay.
passed quickly.
This this is I got this computer about a year ago, and it was like the cheapest one I could find that met the basic specs I wanted, and that is something I'm not going to do again. I've been kind of disappointed by this computer, so apologies in advance for whatever issues we might have.
No, no
Yeah,
worries.
we've been talking a lot about commercial space. I was yeah, we can go wherever you want with this, but I was wondering if you wanted to talk more about Artemis or NASA and that side at some point.
Well, you know, um, Blue Origin not being splashy and not getting a word out is one thing. But would it surprise you that most of the non-space people I talk to don't know that NASA plans to send astronauts to the moon in 2024?
It would surprise me a little bit. Of course, I guess that shows the part of the bubble I'm in. I'm in this. We talk about the media bubbles we all live in now with like the internet and social media, and I guess you get rude awakenings of that every once in a while. That would be one of them because it's such a pervasive thing in the space industry that the same way that the International Space Station was what drove all of human spaceflight through like the 2000s and the 2010s. Like Artemis is the big central focus of what NASA human spaceflight is doing right now. So I guess it's a little disappointing that most random people off the street don't know that, and I guess it indicates that maybe we're not doing a good enough job getting the I was going to say PR. It's not quite the same when it's a government agency like NASA because it's not a matter of selling a product. It's more like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the infrastructure we're building. This is trying to be like the highway system or the postal service for space. And so, yeah, I would hope people would know about that. So, yeah, that's unfortunate that is that kind of what you found in
Well,
talking to people outside of the space industry?
yes, I would say 80% of them did not know that we were going to the moon in 2024. I would also say that I did run across at least one person that thought the whole thing was shut down at the end of the shuttle, like you had mentioned
Mhm.
earlier.
Oh yeah, I,
Uh,
I remember that. I remember lots of people saying that, like in 2011, 2012, that kind of time frame.
and I've even talked to a couple of people that are, if we do go to the moon in 2024, it'd be good to finally get there type of people.
Yeah, there's also that.
But
Which like the most polite thing I can say is just go, oh, okay.
yeah, it's interesting. I actually, I try to be respectful to people's viewpoints and try to come from a position of trying to understand as opposed to trying to convince or judge.
Mhm.
But both of them kind of talked about the quality of the video on the moon as being sort of their major thing that they point to in terms of saying that they thought it was not real,
It
which
it
I
shows
think
how visual creatures we are, I guess. That well, and also how in the modern media era, I guess that is like as close to truth as you get. Is just like, is this video I'm looking at believable? And if it's yes or no, that determines whether I'll believe you're accurate or not.
I know, and it's amazing our ability to create artificial scenes that are convincing, sometimes more convincing than real footage.
Mhm.
Which kind of brings up another point. Tom Cruise going to the ISS next fall. I don't
Yeah,
think it's going to be a cinematographic event. I think the video out of that's going to be more like the Blair Witch Project than it would be like Mission Impossible.
yeah. Well, we'll see. I think it's really cool that he's doing that. I think that that fits into the whole idea of the democratization of space and trying to make the sphere of humans' activity in space something more than just a very select elite number of people doing a elite number of things. And I said it's like, okay, Tom Cruise is clearly part of a elite. It's just a or unelite. It's just a different elite cadre than like the group of NASA astronauts. It's not the group of like jet pilots and biochemists, but the group of top echelon people in media and entertainment. So like maybe it's not that big of a step toward democratization, but it's one of these things where like any step in that direction seems like a good move to me. And of course, sometimes it can backfire. Like early in the space shuttle program, there were efforts to do that where like I think we just kind of got ahead of ourselves with the space shuttle. There was this thinking of like, okay, we have a reusable vehicle now. We're flying it on a regular basis. All right, let's just go. Let's just treat this like we're opening up space. And so you got that kind of, I'll call it like different types of elites flying on it. We started flying senators and representatives in space. We started flying, uh, scientists and researchers from other countries that didn't have their own space program. And then we get to the point where it's like, okay, let's really open it up. what should we do first? Let's fly a teacher. And then that happened to be where this disaster happened. So, you know, um, hopefully where we are now is we're in a more mature situation. We're less likely to do this thing where we're like all gung ho about opening space up, and then we find that we have to backtrack for the next 20 years and say, no, 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 this is going to be this more closed off realm. It's just for the astronauts. So, yeah, we'll see what Tom Cruise and his crew comes up with. I hope that it happens too, because you know how these things are, and how there's always some risk until it actually occurs that it could all fizzle out. Like I think a few years ago, Sarah Brightman was going to go to the ISS and was going to do some stuff there that was interesting, and then that wound up fizzling out. So we'll see. We'll see if Tom Cruise is more can cross some of those bridges and be sort of an ambassador of space to people who wouldn't hear about it otherwise. I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in terms of getting across those media bubbles, he's definitely a lot of different bubbles than the regular space people for sure. And I found out a few interviews ago that apparently the Russians are sending an actress to the moon sometime not to the moon, to the International Space Station
Mhm.
sometime next year. And I was thinking, there's an opportunity here. They could both be at the ISS at the same time, and now you got two actors.
Yeah, that would be interesting if that worked out. It reminds me a little of the time that Scott Kelly was commanding the ISS, and then Mark Kelly was going to fly one of the last shuttle flights, but it didn't actually work out for the two of them to be in space at once. And I was kind of wondering, like, okay, is NASA actually going to let this happen, or is there going to be too much concern that if there's a big problem, you've got two brothers on the ISS at once? But anyways, well, that having people from outside the industry would be more significant. We'll see how that goes.
Talking about that, have you heard of a program called Space Hero?
I've heard a little bit about it. Yeah, that's is that the idea? It's like a reality show where people compete to get flown to the space station.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
Yeah, that'll be interesting if that works out.
yeah. I think it could definitely. I mean, it's funny. I talk to people, and they have questions about what's the purpose and the worth and what have you, and then uh, when you ask, well, we were thinking about sending you, suddenly the all those questions kind of fall away, and they're like, ah, yeah, we should definitely do it then.
Hmm.
So, yeah. What do you hope we get out of the moon? Um, our trip to the moon. You said you're afraid that we might go there and that's there's nothing to pull it forward. But like, how would you like to see it develop? What would be your ideal state?
Well, uh, it this is kind of getting to where I'm not as much of an expert at the planetary science side of things as I would like to be. I'm part of my concern with it is I'm not actually sure that the moon has all the resources we need to really establish a permanent human presence there. Like it looks like Mars pretty unambiguously has that. Like there are issues with settling Mars. Like we don't know how the lower gravity will affect people, and we don't know how the higher amount of radiation will affect people. Like if how big of a challenge those will be to permanent habitation there. But it looks like all the other elements, like there is water, there's organic material, there's all the building material you could possibly need. And I'm not sure that the moon quite has all that. Like there is some water at the poles. We've made this discovery with Sophia that there's water in the soil other places on the moon, although it's like not it's not a lot of water. You have to sift through a ton of material to get any usable amount of water out of it. And given that it's kind of impoverished in organics, I, I would love to see a permanent human presence on the moon. I don't know how practical it is for that to be anything more than a scientific base, something like the stations we have in Antarctica. But I think we should at least try to have that. We should see if it would make sense at some point to like build cities on the moon, because I think that like that's one of the core things that got me motivated to join this industry is like, yeah, I think that there should I want to see this future where humans are not confined just to Earth for the rest of civilization, but that there's there's more out there in the sphere of human existence. There's more territory that we can go live on. There's a frontier that can continue. And we should give the moon a shot. We should see if that can become that frontier. So what I guess my concern with Artemis is just as long as it's constrained to SLS, and if SLS is only flying about once a year, your throughput of people going to the moon is going to be pretty small. It's going to be hard to even have like like a minimal sort of base at the South Pole, like using the base like Amundsen Scott base at the South Pole of Earth versus a base that may actually be at the South Pole of the moon, oddly enough. Like the poles turn out to be more habitable than the equatorial region is. Uh, it'll be a challenge just to get to that. I think we're going to need to fly more people. We're going to need to fly more people more often, and it's going to come down to resources. I hear a lot of people say, "Well, the problem is just NASA gets such a tiny chunk of the budget," and this is where I think you'll find a big disconnect between people who are active in the industry versus people outside of it. I think most people outside the space industry think NASA gets some huge chunk of the federal budget. It gets like the amount that like defense or social security gets, and they get like half of 1% of the federal budget. So and the people who know that say, well, look, it's a small chunk. We could get 1% of the budget, and that would be double. And it's like, okay, great, yeah, we could fly like 4 SLSs a year. That would be better. But what I would rather see would be take that money, take those resources, and work on the issue of getting the cost of getting into space down. And I like that Artemis is taking some steps toward that. So the the fact that the lander is going to be uh, kind of in this public-private partnership. You've got the national team, you've got Dynetics, you've got SpaceX all competing for that, and that's not going to fly on SLS. It's going to fly on New Glenn or Vulcan or Starship or Falcon Heavy, something like that. Uh, that that's a step in the right direction. I think for a long-term presence on the moon, for more than just like, yeah, okay, we're back. It's not just Neil and Buzz through Gene Cernan, Apollo 11 through Apollo 17. Like America is back in a major way on the moon. Uh, for there to be a truly enduring human presence there, we need to get the costs down, and that means it's going to need to be some kind of public-private partnership. It's going to need to be something a little more like Commercial Crew. That's like if I were summoned by like Joe Biden's transition team and said like, okay, what do you want to do with NASA now for the next 4 years? That's the recommendation I would make. Would be, I think Artemis is a good starting point, and I think we need to know what's going to come next. Because my concern is just like, let's say everything goes perfectly with it. We really do land people back on the moon in 2024. The next mission isn't going to be for another year after that, and it's going to land like another 3 or 4 people on the moon, and then a year after that, another 3 or 4 people land on the moon. Like it just it seems like it's something that's too fragile to me, where it's easy for someone to come on and say, okay, we did it, we ticked that box, we got back to the moon, like say before China did, which hopefully they come along too, and they have a competing presence there. I think that competition between the great powers, like in Apollo, could be a good influence for us to kind of stretch a little bit. I I think unless we, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of talking in circles here, but unless you get at that root cause of like, it's hard to do stuff in space because we make so few vehicles, and we make so few vehicles because they're so expensive. Get at that root cause, and then we can open up all this other stuff where like there can be an enduring human presence on the moon. We can start working on sending people to Mars. We can start working on sending people to asteroids. So uh, I'm sorry, I forget uh, the initial question that got us going this direction, but hopefully there's an answer buried in all that.
No, that's good. But talking about Artemis, I think NASA requested 3.5 billion for the human landing system. The Senate bill has a
Mhm.
billion. The House bill has 500 million. They still have to come together and figure out what the compromise budget's going to be. But I wouldn't imagine a compromise being higher than the largest of the two, right? I mean,
It's not going to be what NASA wants, and it's not, and what NASA wants, I don't think is what they need. I mean, these things are always take more resources than you think they will. You can look at the ISS, you can look at James Webb, look at Falcon Heavy. Look how much longer that took to take than SpaceX thought it would. Yeah. So
um,
yeah, it's an important question you bring up.
yeah, I guess. What kind of risk is that? Is that a insurmountable obstacle in terms of getting to the moon by 2024, not having that money, or do you see international partnerships and private public partnerships being able to fill that gap somehow?
I I'm not optimistic about the 2024 date, and maybe part of that is just me being jaded from having seen many other programs have very ambitious schedules and then fail to meet them in the past. But um, I I struggle to see like I think the program would have to get lucky is what it would take. Like SLS from here on out would need to have a flawless development program. Orion, same story. No big problems crop up. The human lander system needs to just go absolutely swimmingly from start to finish. And just like the odds of all of those things lining up doesn't seem likely to me. And that's uh, putting more resources into it, putting more money into those development programs that lets you open up some contingencies. So, for example, with the human lander system, if that gets less resources than NASA's asking for, that's going to encourage them to down select sooner to where you're putting all your eggs in one basket. If you have the resources to continue to develop multiple options, then the odds are better that, like we saw this with SpaceX and Starliner. Starliner had these huge problems crop up in its development, and Crew Dragon had challenges too. But the fact that both were being pursued by NASA at the same time meant that Crew Dragon was ready, and it's now sending people to the ISS. It's being treated as an operational vehicle, while Starliner still hasn't completed its development testing. So that's the first concern I would have with NASA not getting enough money. I just don't really see how either from foreign um, either from foreign partners or from like the commercial partners, them putting more skin in the game, how that makes up that shortfall. Uh, I mean, is it possible? Sure. It's just not like I wouldn't take that bet, assuming that it's actually going to happen. Now that being said, I'm not a pessimist about Artemis because I think that the 2024 deadline, like that's politically motivated, right? That's there to say it will be done during this next presidential term. So there's a risk chronologically if you go past that whoever's in charge, like whoever's on top of the executive branch in 2025 says, no, I don't want to do this and cancel it. But there's enough momentum between all the work at all the NASA centers and all the commercial partners that there's going to be a lot of political momentum to keep it going. I mean, you saw this with Constellation when the administration changed between Bush and Obama, and there was the Augustine Commission that said this is going to need a lot more development resources than NASA said it will. Like, we need to commit to this and we need to give it many billions of more dollars. And there was some sticker shock at that. And there was this sense of, okay, Constellation's done. We're going to focus elsewhere. Ares 5 is done. But we're going to have this new rocket called the Space Launch System that looks a lot like Ares 5. And the crew exploration vehicle is done. But there's the multi-purpose crew vehicle, which is also Orion. So, like, probably 80% or so of the elements of Constellation survived and continued, just maybe in a different form with a different badge. And that's why it was relatively straightforward in 2018, 2019, when these decisions were being made to repurpose that again in this effort with Artemis to go back to the moon. So my expectation is that I I think Artemis has a good chance of succeeding. I think it will send people back to the moon. Will it happen in 2024? I don't know. And I honestly don't think it's that essential that it does happen by then. Like, it would be, as an American, I think it would be cool if we sent people back to the moon before China does. When's China going to send people to the moon? Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. They haven't sent people into space since 2016. So China is obviously confident in going at their own pace and not worrying about what anybody else does. Like, they're going to set their own schedule, and we should set our own schedule. And I think it would be better if we gave NASA the resources that they're asking for and try to give them everything they can to succeed by 2024. But realistically, there's 100 senators and 400 something Congress people, and the president, and who's in charge of all these commercial companies and who's in charge of all the international space agencies. They're all going to make some compromised mess. And in that mess, hopefully, we'll keep making progress. That's so I guess I'm guardedly optimistic. Like, I fully expect there to be a bureaucratic and scheduled mess, but I also think we'll keep making progress. At least I hope that we will. So does that kind of get at what you're asking?
Absolutely. And, I keep thinking, is there another path to the moon that can happen between now and 2024? I think, we do have the Falcon Heavy we do have the Blue Moon kind of base infrastructure.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, can you imagine some type of SpaceX Blue Origin partnership where SpaceX, or even a bigger set of private partnerships where SpaceX launches like a, a command module or service module and habitat type situation into orbit. You have like the Blue Moon lander and the national team's lander, like
Mhm.
dock with it, and then you have like the Dragon, like send the people up and a regular Falcon 9, and they go off to the moon and they can land. It's like almost have higher confidence that that would be possible than SLS.
Right. Yeah, and the fact that there's a big political motivation to keep SLS going. I think honestly, if in like 2010, 2011, a decision had been made along the lines you're talking about, we would be in a better place now to get to the moon by 2024. I mean, I don't work at NASA. I work in the private space industry, so obviously, like, examine my biases for what they are. But what's happened with that is we've we've done what NASA's always done, which is that they make decisions partly on a technical basis and partly on a political survival basis, and spreading the work around between Alabama and Texas and Florida and all these different contractors has made SLS very robust against getting canceled. Like, it's kept getting money, it's kept this effort going in different forms. First Constellation, then uh, the efforts beyond low Earth orbit under Obama, now Artemis. Uh, so all that said, like, I think that the kind of system you're talking about, that's more likely to be that more robust, lower cost method of getting people to the moon that is more sustainable in the long term. I think trying to start that in 2020 or starting that in 2021, I just have a hard time seeing how that's ready by 2024. I think absolutely sometime in the 2020s that could work. And I think there's a good chance we'll start, like, SLS will fly a few times and then there will be kind of a thought of, okay, we did that. Why are we still doing this? This looks, wherever Starship is, wherever New Glenn and Blue Moon are, that looks like a better option. So let's go that way. So, you know, I think I think deadlines serve a purpose and they help keep people motivated to keep making progress. But that's more the way I see 2024 is like, we should do what we need to do to keep making progress, and we should keep that in mind as like, yes, if possible, let's try to maintain this. But at the same time, like, you can wind up making some dumb decisions in the name of maintaining an unrealistic schedule. Like, if you say arbitrarily, I want this vehicle to fly this year, when you know it's not likely to fly for another 3 years, let's say, you'll make decisions that will hurt you in the long term. You'll say, well, I don't have time to develop a new component, or I don't have time to fully optimize the system. I'm just going to make whatever bare bones thing I have that is minimally functional now, make that work now, and you'll get it working within a year. And the rest of the rocket will be delayed. The rest of the system you're working on will still be delayed because that's not going to be the long pull anymore. So if you know things are going to take a little longer, then it's better to take the time and figure out, like, what is the best global way to optimize it, not just get your little part of it done the fastest. So that's I guess why I kind of bristle at the over aggressive schedules sometimes. Is I may have a little personal experience working with that, of being pushed to make decisions that in the long run seem kind of dumb based on maintaining a short term schedule.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. What you talk about reminds me of something in software circles about minimum viable product, right?
Mhm.
MVP. And both Jeff and Elon come from the internet world where that was, you need to get your
Mhm.
store up. It just needs to barely work and we can optimize along the way.
Mhm.
Um, but yet, you talk about when it comes to space, needing to have a different mindset. And it seems to me that Elon's very much brought that same mindset with him to aerospace, but with the whole step-by-step ferociously and, you know, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It
Mhm.
seems like Jeff is kind of leaning against those kind of internet-esque tendencies.
Yeah, I think there's a limit to how far you can take that, and I think there's a quote actually from Elon Musk sometime uh, around when they were in the era when they were getting Falcon 1 flying, where he said, the difference between a rocket and a piece of software is that if you have problems in beta testing, you can't just send a software patch out and fix it. Like if you've launched the rocket and there's a problem, it's going to crash. Like you can't just patch that while you're on your way to space. So uh, it's useful in the sense of I've worked in a big old aerospace company at Boeing, and I've seen like the way that overly processing things and engaging in the bureaucracy too much can tie you up, and it can keep you from making the kind of progress you can make if you're more agile. But there's also a time where you really need to be able to say, okay, realistically, what do we need to get this working? And what do we need to sacrifice in terms of schedule to accomplish that? And the problem is nobody wants to do that because time is money. Like sacrificing the schedule is extremely expensive. And it's very difficult to get over this idea of uh, whatever schedule objective was made, not hitting that because it wasn't a realistic target. Uh, Getting people to see that as it if we don't hit that but we make a better product, it's better in the long run. You have to get past the idea that uh, yes, but if we had been flying when we said we'd be flying, we'd be making money so much faster. And this is especially hard at small companies that are dependent on outside investors to keep going, where their burn rate might be higher than they want it to be, and so every day they're not flying a rocket. It's a lot of money down the drain that they have to make up from somewhere. But NASA doesn't have that problem. But NASA's pursuing this schedule that's aggressive for a different reason, and that's the political stability stuff that we talked about. So it's funny that you have these small private startup companies versus big government aerospace agency at NASA who wind up having similar pressures for completely different reasons. And yeah, I'm not going to stand up and say like, oh, this is bad. We shouldn't try to send people to the moon in 2024. I think we absolutely should. I just think that when the time comes and it's January 1st, 2025, and we're still waiting for Artemis 1 to fly, that's okay. Or Artemis 3, whatever it is that the first human landing is, that's okay. Like we're still on the way. We're still going to make it happen. Let's just let it happen. I don't know. That's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, if we missed the 2024 date, but it looks like it's going to happen, I will be completely happy. The thing that I'm concerned about is in 2021 going, 2024 is not possible, so we'll push it out to 2028. And it turns out to be like a James Webb thing where it's
Right.
like, I mean, the telescope should already be
Well,
at the L2 point, making observations.
yeah.
What's happening,
I'm also looking forward to the history of James Webb being written at some point, so we all know what not to do. The same way that like the history of SpaceX will be a very interesting case study in how to make this thing that so many in the industry thought was not possible happen. James Webb is like it's like I don't know. This is kind of a random analogy, but I'm a fan of The Crown, the series about like the British monarchy on Netflix, and like this last season, a lot of it talked about Charles and Diana and their marriage falling apart. It's like everything should have worked and it didn't. Somehow it didn't work. You had all the resources you needed. That like James Webb is like the Charles and Diana of NASA programs. It had everything it needed to be this happy fairy tale mission, and it still is sitting on the ground somewhere waiting to be launched. So don't do that. I totally get it's a balance getting it right. I think you can cause serious problems to a program by overpromising and underdelivering and imposing an unrealistic schedule on everyone. So I'm not saying anything new saying that's bad, don't do that. You can also cause enormous problems by being complacent about the schedule and saying, oh yeah, whatever, push it out another year, push it out another year, yeah, whatever. Like yeah, you wind up with these boondoggles that cost 3 times what they should and they take a decade longer to accomplish than they should. So the real trick, the real sign of a good manager and a good leader of good leadership in a program is finding the right place, the right compromise between those two. And I don't know. I mean, nobody knows who the next administrator of NASA is going to be. but whoever that person winds up being, I hope they're able to find the right balance, and I hope they're able to, not lead us down a path where we're suboptimally optimizing the system due to an unrealistic schedule, and they're also not just allowing the schedule to slip forever. So, I'm whoever that person winds up being, I'm rooting for them to find the right balance there.
Yeah, talking about the next NASA administrator, I think Lori Grover, um,
Lori Garver,
Garver. There we
right?
go.
Mhm.
Get the vowel sound right. Yes, Lori. But her name's been floated around, and I was looking at her a little bit more in depth, and it seems like she would definitely be on the short list, I would think.
Yeah, that would be interesting. She's kind of a controversial figure. I know. I like that. I think she's a believer in the commercial side of things and in NASA partnering with commercial companies in a way to like make NASA's budget go further. So I like all that about Lori Garver. Um, yeah, no, I think I she would be an interesting choice. Of course, you never know with stuff like this, and like who the administrator of NASA is very rarely is a top priority. We saw the current administration took a pretty long time to name somebody. Uh, Obama took a while to name his NASA administrator. So I think Bridenstine has said he's going to step down, like even if he gets asked to stay on. So, which, he actually was kind of a surprise to me. Like I did not really have high hopes with Bridenstine coming in. Like coming from the background he had, I think he was the first politician administrator, like coming straight out of Congress doing that. So it's like, okay, is this guy just going to be completely political? But like he's done what I think needed to be done to like help get Commercial Crew over the finish line, and he's really pushed to make Artemis a real program and a believable program. So I understand like with the politics involved why he would do that and say like whatever, I'll give the incoming administration the guy they want, but hopefully whoever takes over can pick up the torch and keep making progress there.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the way that he talked about his decision was, we need an NASA administrator that has the ear of the president, that has the confidence of the president, and it may not be good for me to stay on because it may be put NASA at a disadvantage. But I've received, I have a North Houston Space Society group that I've put together, and a couple of our members kind of took a different interpretation of, he's really partisan. He's shown his true colors. He's not supporting the new administration, uh, and that kind of took me aback a little. But I can, looking at the situation again, I can kind of see how maybe you come to
Well,
that thought too.
it's the normal way these things happen. It's pretty rare for people to stay on through administration changes like that. Like what Dan Golden did, where he was nominated by at the end of the first Bush administration. Clinton kept him on through his two terms, and then he stayed on for the beginning of the second Bush administration. Like that's a rarity. That doesn't usually happen. So uh, I don't know. I I I freely admit I have my own political opinions and issues there. So uh, but I try to be aware of my own biases, and I try to give people the benefit of the doubt where I can. And with Bridenstine, like I'm like, okay, there's plenty of normal explanations for why he would do that, not just like he's a political hack trying to bring down the next administration. So I don't feel any need to say that about him. I can understand where someone's coming from having different opinions, but like I personally am not going to go there.
Yeah, I tend to think Bridenstine means well.
Mhm.
Um, so, and like you said, he was really surprising how good of administrator he was in terms of getting people
Mhm.
motivated and what have you. So you mentioned you never really wanted to be an astronaut. You wanted to build rockets, but if it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
I absolutely do want to go to space someday. And I mean, I in 2017 when or it was end of 2016, beginning of 2017, there was a call for astronauts. Like I applied, like another 15,000 people did, or something stupid like that. I didn't apply this last round just because they saw how many people applied, and they're like, okay, no, you actually have to have an advanced degree now. Either that or like be a jet pilot with 1,000 hours of experience. And it's like, okay, well, I know how this works. There's no point in me applying what I know. I know, like, they're not going to. There's nothing on my resume that's going to make them change their minds when they're going to get like another 15,000 applicants and 1,000 of them are going to be supremely qualified. Whatever that is, what it is. I I yes, I do want to travel in space someday. But what I meant with not being as interested in being an astronaut is like I would love to have that job. I think it looks like a really interesting job, and I would love to go to space and like be part of this effort advancing the frontier in space, which is the way I see what astronauts do. It's not just space tourism or like let's go to have fun. It's let's go and let's do serious work to pave the way for other people to come after us. It's more just like I I mean I was the kid who like I was obsessed with shows about airplanes and like how airplanes were made, what the decisions that led to the designs that they had. And so like as a kid and all my like scratch paper, I was scribbling like my own airplane designs and stuff. And I was very interested when I learned more about the technical side of rockets, about the rocket equation. I was like in high school in the margins of my notes, like fake faux designing my own spaceships to do different things. Uh, and just that I found more appealing. Like I was more interested in like the process of making a spacecraft and figuring out what goes into that, what it should look like, than I was in like being the guy who operates the spaceship. It's like that would be a great job too. I would love to have that job. But the guy who is, like to use an analogy, go back to Apollo or something, like the guy who decided like what this machine is going to be that's going to take people to the moon versus the guy who sits down and reads a manual about how to operate it and then goes operate it. Like the guy making that machine sounded like he had a more exciting job to me than the guy operating it. Like maybe I'm a little different from most people that way, but so yeah, I guess my current career suits me.
That
Uh,
makes sense. I think the early astronauts were like their complaints were being reduced to what, spam in a can.
yeah, which was unfair. I mean, that's what like supposedly Jaeger said that about the early astronauts, and it's I think there were sour grapes in that. Like if you had given Chuck Yeager the opportunity to be the first American in space, I'm sure he would have been excited to do that. I do unfortunately have to go pretty
Oh,
soon here. My wife
no
is going to
worries.
be back pretty soon, and we're going to have the little ones running around. So
I
she'll take
understand.
that.
Let's go and wrap up then. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I didn't really have anything in mind. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I came in a little bit unprepared. I heard about this from one of the interns we had at Blue Origin. It just sounded like an interesting thing, and so just happy to share my thoughts about whatever it was you wanted to talk about. So,
Well,
uh,
actually, my plan was to ambush people at Starbucks. So you
yeah, that,
can't be
that works.
more unprepared than that.
Well, that's a good way to get the random guy or gal off the street, which that's important too. I'm glad I hopefully I provided you something interesting from the mindset of the people down in the trenches, just like living, breathing this every day, and it'll be good to compare and contrast that to the people who are like, oh wait, we're going to the moon. So I'll be interested to see that perspective too, where you are in another 4 years.
Absolutely. And yeah, and if you know of anybody else that'd be willing to have a conversation, I need to find about 1,490 some odd more people.
Mhm. Yeah, got some more days to fill between now and December 31st, 2024.
It's true. It's
Okay.
true.
Yeah, no, I'll pass the message along and let some of the people I know. Hopefully, you'll get a request from somebody else in my network soon.
Well, thank you so much, Grant. I really appreciate your time, and it was so great to actually connect with somebody that's actually making space happen. So,
Hmm. Yeah, it's a challenging thing, but we're all trying to make it happen. It's exciting. Mhm. All right.
well, you have a good rest of your day then.
Yeah, yeah. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye bye.
Bye.